My name is Olivia Bennett, and on my 36th birthday, at a luxurious hotel in the heart of San Francisco, I received the kind of gift no one ever wants. My sister stood up, raised her glass, and announced she was pregnant with my husband's child. No one could breathe. And me? I just smiled. Because I had a secret. One that would silence the entire room. Have you ever been betrayed by the very person you once protected through your entire childhood? Have you ever stood in the middle of a shock so brutal the world crumbled around you? Yet you had to pretend you were fine. Tell me where you're listening from, and if this story stirs something in you, like, share, and follow the channel. Because what happened next will take your breath away. Let me tell you, I grew up in what looked like a perfect home. A lovely little house in suburban Oregon, with rose bushes in the front yard and the smell of apple pie every weekend. But behind that picture-perfect image were things no outsider could see. Favoritism. Words sharp as knives, disguised as casual remarks. The feeling of being invisible inside your own home. I was the firstborn. When I was 4, my mother gave birth to Tessa, my younger sister. And from that moment on, everything changed. Every gaze, every compliment, every ounce of attention shifted to Tessa. And me? I became the shadow. Quiet, obedient, the model big sister, as my mother liked to say. But in reality, it was a cage that locked away my childhood under the weight of sacrifice. I remember my 7th birthday. I wished for a blue bicycle, my favorite color. Dad promised, Mom promised. But when the day came, the bike was handed to Tessa. She's too young to understand waiting. You're older, you can let her have it, my mom said, her voice sweet and soothing. Yet my heart sank like a stone. Tessa grew up with a sweet smile and big, innocent eyes that made people melt. But behind that charm was cunning, mischief, and, I'll say it, coldness. If I got a new toy, it ended up in her room the next day. If my drawing got posted on the classroom bulletin board, Tessa would tear it down when no one was looking. Every time I brought it up, my mother would shake her head and say, "You're sisters. Don't be petty." When I was 14, I saved up for a whole month from my part-time job to buy a beige coat I adored. I hid it carefully in my closet. A week later, Tessa wore it to school, adding sparkly beads to the collar like it was hers. I broke down in tears. Dad said nothing. Mom scolded me. "You're her sister. Why are you being so selfish?" I learned to stay quiet, to cry into my pillow at night, to stop sharing my joys, because anything I valued would be taken. I studied hard, topped my class, got selected for the state-level debate team. But during parent-teacher meetings, my mom only talked about the song Tessa sang at her elementary school concert. When I was 17, I had a crush on a boy from class. We were both on the Winter Festival committee. I thought he noticed me, cared about me. But just before the dance, I found out he had started seeing Tessa, who was only 14 at the time. And the person who told me was my own mother. With a calm face, she said, "Tessa's still young. Boys prefer cute girls, not ones who are smart like you." That night, I didn't go to the dance. I sat alone on the roof, staring at a pitch-black sky with no stars. It was the first time I asked myself, what did I do wrong, just for wanting to be loved fairly? After high school, I didn't wait a minute. I left that house the first chance I got. Earned a full-ride scholarship in communications at Columbia University. I arrived in New York with 2 old suitcases and a steel-strung resolve. I would never let anyone walk over me again. Life away from home wasn't easy, but it was the first time I knew what it felt like to breathe freely. No comparisons, no one stealing, no one hurting me just because I wasn't dear Tessa. I worked at a bookstore, studied hard, and landed an internship at a top media company by sophomore year. And there I met Daniel, the man I believed would be my forever calm. But fate has a way of replaying old nightmares, doesn't it? I thought I had escaped. That distance and time had helped me step out of Tessa's shadow. But I was wrong. Because that shadow didn't just come from Tessa. It came from my family, from all the years I was forced into silence, forced to be the understanding one, until I lost myself. And now, when my sister, the one who once took everything I loved, stands in the middle of my birthday celebration and announces she's pregnant with my husband's child, I see it clearly. History has repeated itself. But this time, I won't stay quiet. Have you ever lived in a family where love was measured by favoritism? Have you ever been the one who sacrificed, carried the load, gave up, only to be forgotten? If you've been there, leave a comment. I read every word, and I'm here telling the rest of this story for anyone who's ever been pushed into the shadows with no one noticing. They say family is where you come home to, where arms are always open, no matter if you succeed or fail. But what if that very place called home was the first to make you feel like you weren't good enough? What if your own kin were the first to make you question your worth? Then where would you go? I grew up in a modest 2-story home in the suburbs of Sacramento. We never lacked food or clothing, no abuse, but we lacked the things that mattered most. Fairness, being heard, and above all, unconditional love. I was the oldest. Tessa came 3 years after me. My mother once said Tessa was a miracle after a difficult pregnancy. Maybe that's why every ounce of tenderness in our home was poured into her. And me? From the start, I had to be understanding, selfless, the mature one. I learned to grow up before I even had a childhood. Tessa was bright, lively, and extremely good at drawing attention. One tear from her, and my parents would scold me, even when I was the one hurting. One careless word from her and I'd lose my favorite toy, the dress I saved months for, or the solo part in the school play. Whenever I protested, my mom would softly say, "You're the big sister, you have to share." Dad wouldn't even look at me. He'd just mutter, "Don't make a fuss, she's still young." That still young excuse was used over and over, even when we were both adults. And I realized it wasn't that Tessa never grew up. It was that they never allowed me to be small. I remember one time, I was 15 and Tessa was 12. A boy from the neighborhood had a little crush on me. We wrote letters, nothing more. I never even held his hand. But somehow, Tessa found one of my notes. The next morning, the whole neighborhood knew. My mom didn't ask a thing. She just shouted, forced me to write a self-reflection for shaming the family. And Tessa? She just sat nearby, half smiling, twirling a strand of her blonde hair like it was a well-earned victory. That was the first time I cried in front of my mother. And the last. I realized my tears never mattered. I hoped things would change as we got older, but the cracks only deepened. When I earned a full scholarship to college, Mom just said, "Well, guess you studied hard enough." But when Tessa got into an average private school with mediocre grades, the whole family threw a party. I left that house at 18. One old suitcase, a few outfits, and a fragile belief that if I worked hard enough, I could build a world no one could take from me. I learned to pick myself up after every fall. No one from home called to ask if I was eating enough. No one checked if I caught a cold when the seasons changed. On holidays, I stayed in the dorm, watching friends go home, waiting for a phone call. That never came. I worked at coffee shops, libraries, even weddings, just to afford books, rent, or a winter coat that was warm enough for Chicago. I never complained. I just felt invisible to my own family. Tessa never left my life, even when I tried to keep her out. She watched everything I did on social media. When I got promoted to assistant manager, she posted a photo beside my company's logo with a caption, "Visiting my big sis's workplace? Let's see if it's really worth the hype." When I got engaged to Daniel, my sister sent a message. "Hope he's not as boring as he looks." I should have cut ties long ago. But I didn't. Because part of me still believed that blood meant something sacred. That one day, my sister would change. That I'd finally have a real sibling. not a shadow always trying to take everything I held dear. I was wrong. And on that birthday night, when Tessa announced she was pregnant by the man I once trusted most, I realized the cruelest kind of betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the one who once held your hand, once shared your bed, once cried and begged for forgiveness after breaking your favorite doll, then stabs you again the moment you turn away. But what she didn't know was that I had learned to endure. And I had learned to wait for the right moment. Because in the game where she thought she was leading, I was the one holding the final card. Maybe after all the emptiness I felt growing up, I'd always longed for a place to call home, not made of bricks, but of trust and peace. And when I met Daniel, I thought I had found it. We met at a medical communications conference in Chicago. He was a neurosurgeon, tall, polished, with calm, gray blue eyes. He approached me while I was waiting for coffee and asked if I had been the one who asked that question during the panel. When I nodded, he smiled gently. Your voice makes people want to hear more. We had coffee that day, at dinner, then conversations we didn't want to end. Daniel wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. He listened, patiently. He asked what I wanted, what I liked, what I dreamed of. No one had ever asked me that. I felt seen. Not as the strong eldest daughter, not as the woman always fending for herself, but just me. Small, vulnerable, and still worthy of love. We dated for almost 2 years before he proposed. By the bay, on a foggy morning. The ring was simple, understated, but it was his eyes when he asked, "Would you build a family with me?" Well, that made me say yes without hesitation. Our marriage, at least in the first 2 years, was a soft symphony. He always came home on time, always cooked dinner on Fridays, always kissed my forehead when I worked late. I used to think, I've finally been chosen! Not the second option, not the one who gives things up. We bought a small house in Pacific Heights. Not big, but it had a sunny balcony and an open kitchen just like I loved. Daniel supported my goal to become a communications director. He cheered me on through every stressful project. Once, he even made an animated video for my birthday. Something small, but the kind of gesture I'd always wished for from family and never got. I thought, this is happiness. But real happiness doesn't come with the fear that it'll vanish if you blink. And somewhere along the way, though I can't say exactly when, my marriage started to make me afraid of losing it. Ingber, the first night he came home late without warning. You texted him 3 times. No reply. When he arrived, he just smiled wearily. Surgery ran late, sorry. I believed him. How could I not? He was a doctor. Unexpected things happen. Then came the second time. The third. Each time he had a reason. Perfect reasons. So perfect they started to feel unreal. I began to notice his phone was always face down. His schedule suddenly unpredictable. A strange scent on his collar that wasn't mine. A missing button on his shirt. One he hadn't noticed. I said nothing. Not right away. I buried the doubt. Like I had with Tessa for years growing up. I told myself, you're being paranoid. Maybe it's just a stressful season. I didn't want to shatter the peaceful illusion I had fought so hard for. Then came the miscarriage. At 7 weeks. I called him. He didn't answer. When he finally arrived at the hospital, he stood at the end of the hallway, surgical coat still stained from the last operation. He didn't hold me. Didn't say a word. Just asked, "Do you need a ride home?" I shook my head. Because right then, I realized I had returned to a familiar state. Dealing with pain alone, while the person beside me stood there, but wasn't really there. After that, I brought up having a baby. He dodged it, said it wasn't the right time, that work was too intense, that we should enjoy each other first. I nodded, because I loved him, and because I was scared to lose him. But inside me, something cracked. I started noticing strange charges on the credit card. Restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never booked. I asked. He laughed. Made the reservations for a coworker. You're overthinking. I laughed with him. But in my heart, I turn to people who don't laugh when you say you have a gut feeling. I hired a private investigator. They gave me photos. Footage. A rented apartment under a different company name. One Daniel visited several times a week. No sign of Tessa yet. Just him, with a woman whose back was to the camera. Still, I didn't act. I stayed quiet. Not out of weakness, but because I needed time. I needed to understand how someone like Daniel could betray me, and how I, after all my childhood lessons, had allowed myself to be hurt in the same way again. Then, Tessa started visiting more often. She brought pastries, made jokes, complimented Daniel, and said, "Aren't you jealous? Having such a handsome husband and letting him be on call all the time?" I laughed, but the laughter wasn't pure anymore. I don't know when exactly I started to suspect. Maybe it was the glance they exchanged. Maybe the casual brush of hands. Or maybe it was the instinct of someone who had her toys stolen since age 3 and developed a special sense for betrayal. All I know is, when Tessa walked into my birthday party that night, in that tight red dress, lips bold, holding Daniel's hand like he was hers, and I wasn't shocked anymore. I just felt relieved. Because the show had finally reached its end. My 36th birthday fell on a calm Saturday night. Clear skies, no wind. I reserved a private rooftop space at the Lillian Hotel, where city lights shimmered through wine glasses. I wanted something simple. Close friends, a few trusted coworkers, my parents, and Daniel. Tessa was invited too. Though I no longer expected anything from her, I still sent the invite. Maybe out of habit, maybe as one final test. I spent the afternoon getting ready. The emerald dress Daniel once complimented. The earrings my mom gave me when I graduated college. A soft red lipstick, enough to stand out but not overpower. Daniel said he'd be late due to an urgent surgical meeting. I nodded over the phone. Light as air. Like nothing was wrong. Guests arrived. Jazz music played gently. I received warm hugs, glitter-wrapped gifts, kind wishes. Some friends said I looked more radiant than ever. I smiled, thanked them, partly out of courtesy, partly because I truly felt lighter. Maybe it was the feeling of someone about to close a chapter they no longer wanted to live in. Then Tessa arrived. She came in like a storm. Tight red dress, sky-high heels, every step deliberate. People turned. She smiled, waved, and behind her Daniel appeared. My breath caught in my chest. He walked beside her. Not rushed, not awkward. His hand resting lightly on Tessa's back like it belonged there. She turned to him, smiled, then looked at me, eyes gleaming with meaning. I heard someone drop a fork. A brief silence stretched into eternity. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Tessa approached the center table. He looked at me for a long time, then spoke. "Sorry for being late. I have some good news to share with everyone." No one asked. No one needed to. She slowly brushed her hand over her belly. Still flat, but her gesture was intentional. "I'm pregnant. 12 weeks. A soft gasp. I didn't turn, but I knew my mother had sighed emotionally. Tessa didn't stop. Her eyes lit up. Her lips curled into that wicked smile I knew too well. "And the father is Daniel?" The sound of a spoon hitting a glass cut through the air. Someone choked on their drink. Daniel didn't look at me. He just stood there. Eyes fixed on the floor. Like a criminal caught in the act, hoping for silent forgiveness. I sat still. All eyes turned to me. He's waiting for me to cry, to scream, to throw something, curse, storm out like a humiliated woman. But me? I smiled. I stood, calmly, I lifted my wine glass, tapped it gently for attention. Thank you, Tessa, for sharing. What a memorable birthday gift. Then I turned to the crowd, my voice steady. Since tonight seems to be full of surprises, I'd like to share something too. I pulled a small USB from my purse, something I'd prepared 3 weeks ago. Plugged it into the hotel's projector. Lights dimmed. A large screen flickered on. A video appeared. Footage from the hidden camera in the second apartment Daniel secretly rented. Faces, not always clear, but the silhouettes of 2 people, Daniel and Tessa, embracing on a bed. Their faces briefly visible in a close-up. Bummers. Some guests looked away. My mother covered her mouth. My father stood frozen. I stopped the video after a minute. More than enough. That footage, I said, voice unwavering, was obtained legally through a private investigator. I pulled out printed documents from an envelope. These are rental records, credit card statements, and Tessa's visits to an OBGYN. I held up one last document. And the DNA results, confirming the baby isn't Daniel's. Tessa's eyes widened. Daniel turned to her, stunned. I looked at them both. What hurt me most, I said slowly, wasn't the betrayal. It was the fact that you 2 thought I'd never be sharp enough to see it. You thought so little of me, Tessa stammered. You spied on me. You were stalking us? I laughed. Not out of triumph, but at the sheer audacity. Tessa, you've been doing this since we played with dolls. Did you really think I hadn't learned the value of silence? Daniel opened his mouth. I raised my hand to stop him. No need. My sister said enough for both of you. The rest is just garbage. I turned to everyone. Thank you all for coming. This birthday gift, I'll never forget. I raised my glass, tapped it once, one final time, then turned and walked out of the party. No one stopped me. No one dared, because they had seen the truth, not just of Daniel and Tessa, but of me. That I was no longer the fragile girl, no longer the shadow in my own celebration. I left, calmly, but inside, I knew. This fight was only beginning. I didn't go home right after the party. I drove aimlessly through the streets I knew too well, letting the night air slip through the cracked window, cooling the heat still burning on my skin from the sting of betrayal. But strangely, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't shake the way I always imagined I would. I just felt empty. A quiet, hollow kind of emptiness. As if every ounce of trust, every effort I'd poured into growing up, hoping to be seen, to be loved, to belong, had been swept away like ashes. The next morning, I got a text from my mother. Can you come home to see me? I need to talk. That was it. No apology. Not even a, are you okay? I went. Not because I wanted closure, but because I was tired of being silent. My parents' living room hadn't changed in 10 years. The beige fabric couch, the dark wooden shelves, the crooked family photo on the wall. The wedding photo of Daniel and me still sat neatly on the side table next to a small candle, as if last night had only been a bad dream. My mother sat at the end of the couch, eyes avoiding mine. My father stood near the window, arms crossed, face heavy. I sat down without a word. Waited. She spoke first, in that same mix of coaxing and caution I knew too well. About last night. I know it was uncomfortable, but you went too far, Olivia. I looked up at her. Too far? You mean the video? Or the fact that I didn't run out the moment Tessa opened her mouth? She hesitated. It's just, you could have kept things private. In front of that many people. It wasn't good for the family. For the family. I laughed. For the first time in hours. A dry, bitter sound. So what embarrassed you last night wasn't that your youngest daughter slept with your eldest daughter's husband. It was that your eldest daughter dared to speak up. My father stayed quiet, eyes gazing out the window. My mother pursed her lips, slowly replied, Tessa, she's still young. She made a mistake. But you You're educated, you have a career. You should know better. In that moment, something inside me broke, not out of rage, but because I realized I would never be enough for them. No matter how hard I tried, no matter what I achieved, they would always defend Tessa. Even if she stabbed me with a real knife, they'd still say, "You're her sister, you should understand." I pulled a set of papers from my bag, copies of the DNA test results. I placed one on the table. This is the result from Genetica Lab, verified by a lawyer. Tessa's baby isn't Daniel's. My mother froze. My father furrowed his brow and finally spoke. Not Daniel's? Then whose? I looked him straight in the eye. Richard Whitmore. The air turned to ice. I let the silence linger, then continued. The man Tessa's stepmother divorced 4 years ago. The one who was rumored to have an inappropriate relationship with Tessa back when she was an intern at his company. My mother blinked. No. That's not possible. I didn't respond. I pulled out a photo from the envelope. Tessa, stepping out of Richard's apartment at midnight. Coat wide open, hair messy, holding the Gucci purse my mother once called so elegant. My father reached for it, stared at it for a long time, then sank onto the couch, both hands on his head. I spoke softly. I didn't bring this to shame my sister. I brought it so you could understand. What happened last night wasn't an accident. It was the result of years of favoritism and enabling. My mother started crying. Not for me, but for the shattered image of the perfect family she had clung to. I looked at her, not angry. Trust. You once said I was the daughter who could take care of herself. So you focused on Tessa. But did you ever realize? Sometimes the children who can take care of themselves are just learning how to stop needing you. The room fell into silence. A long while later, my father finally said, "I'm sorry." I turned to him. He had his head down, voice low. I know. I let your mother carry everything. And I ignored too much. But I truly didn't think things had gotten this bad. I gave a small nod. Not forgiveness, just recognition that he was at least still capable of honesty. I stood. I'm not blaming anyone anymore. But from now on, I won't play this role in the family anymore. Not the obedient eldest. Not the patient big sister. I'm tired. My mother looked up, eyes still watery. Olivia, where are you going? I smiled, calm, toward wherever people stop calling themselves family while treating you like a stranger. I walked out the door without looking back. Behind me was the house that was once a home, now just a stage with roles I no longer wanted to play. But ahead was the freedom I'd waited my whole life to claim. I left my parents' house in the late afternoon, just as the sun kissed the horizon and cast a bittersweet golden-orange glow over the street. Fallen leaves rustled at my feet, as if the universe itself was whispering, "It's time to let go." When I got home, I didn't turn the lights on right away. I stood in the dark, looking around the living room. Once full of laughter between Daniel and me, late-night movies, quiet talks about our future, our children. All the things I now knew, only I believed in. I pulled my suitcase into the center of the room, opened drawers, cabinets, carefully chose what to take, not for their value, but for their memories. I refused to carry anything that reeked of betrayal. I left my wedding ring on the windowsill, where Daniel always tossed his keys after work. The ring still engraved, "Forever starts here." I stared at it for a moment, then turned away without looking back. I moved into my best friend Jenna's apartment. She was the kind of friend everyone needs. The one who doesn't ask too many questions, doesn't rush to give advice, but stays when you need her. The day I moved in, Jenna just hugged me tight and said, "Stay as long as you need. Just don't forget to eat." In her small room, I began piecing my life back together. At first, it was the little things. Changing my email passwords, freezing joint accounts, calling the lawyer. Patricia Donovan. A sharp, straightforward woman who never backs down from any cheating husband. "We'll make this quick, clean, and final," Patricia said when I first stepped into her office. "I'm not looking for revenge," I replied. "I just want my life back." Patricia nodded. "And I'll make sure he doesn't take anything else from you." I filed for divorce 3 weeks after that birthday party. Daniel sent a few emails, a few texts, then one drunk call close to midnight. His voice cracked. "I messed up. Olivia, please. Don't leave me." I didn't listen to the end. I no longer had the strength for late regrets and empty promises. From a man who once touched my sister's back like she was already part of him. Tessa called too. Unlike Daniel, her voice wasn't pleading. It sounded like she was looking for redemption. You hate me, don't you?" "I know. I just wanted to be like you." I hung up. Not out of hatred, but because I had loved her. Completely. And when a heart that once loved runs empty, there's no room left for anger. Only silence. Time passed slowly. Some mornings I'd wake up and need a few seconds to remember where I was. That I was no longer Daniel's wife. But some evenings I'd sit by Jenna's apartment window, watching the city lights and feel at peace. I returned to work after a month off. The colleagues who knew me best didn't ask questions. They simply left a warm cup of coffee on my desk each morning or a sticky note that read, "You're still the strong Olivia I admire." I threw myself into work like it was the only way to survive. Project after project. Presentations, meetings, ideas. They swept me away like a wave, saving me and swallowing me at the same time. But in the middle of that current, I began to understand the most important truth. I didn't need Daniel. I never truly needed him to live. What I needed was freedom from the expectations placed on me since childhood. From my parents, from society, from myself. 3 months later, I signed a lease on a small apartment in Brooklyn. Nothing fancy. But it had a balcony where I could grow lavender, a bright little kitchen where I could make pasta the way I liked, with lots of cheese. The kind Daniel used to say, "Packs on weight too fast." I bought a mustard couch the color I'd always loved, but he called tacky. I hung artwork from a street painter, placed fresh flowers every Sunday morning, and began writing again. Writing about myself? I started a blog called From the Ashes. I wrote about betrayal, about the silence of family, about healing from what once felt impossible. And then, hundreds of strangers wrote to me. Single mothers, middle-aged women fresh out of divorce, young girls hurt by their own sisters. I realized I wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long while, I began to feel chosen. One day, at a media conference, I happened to meet Lucas, the final speaker of the day. He talked about rebuilding a brand after personal crisis. He wasn't poetic. He wasn't preachy. But his eyes were quiet and sincere. We talked after the event. No sparks, no thunderclaps. Just a cup of afternoon tea and one well-timed question. Have you ever imagined living a life where you don't have to prove anything to anyone? I smiled, and I said, "I've just begun." Rebirth is never loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or drum rolls. It comes with each steady breath you take when you wake up, with the choice to be kind to yourself, with knowing that you don't need anyone's approval to feel complete. I'm still on that journey. There are still restless nights, still moments when old photos make me tear up. But this time, I know. I won't go back. Because finally, I chose me. I was reorganizing my bookshelf in the small apartment when my phone buzzed. A number from Sacramento. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pause. By the third ring, I picked up. The voice on the other end stopped me cold. "Olivia, it's me, Tessa." I said nothing. My heart clenched. Not out of love, but memory. Old shards I thought were buried stirred beneath my ribs. I know. I have no right to call, Tessa said, voice hoarse. But I need to see you. Just once. I paused, then replied coldly, See me for what? To apologize, she exhaled. And to tell the truth. All of it. I owe you that. We met at a small cafe near the park. The sky that day was gray. No sun, but no rain either. Just like my mood, quiet, uncertain. Not sure if healing or still bruised. Tessa walked in looking nothing like the version I remembered. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes, and her once glossy blonde hair was tied back with an old elastic band. She sat across from me, hesitated, then softly said, Thank you for coming. I didn't reply. Just sat upright, hands around my coffee, guarding my heart from drifting back to the softer years. Tessa lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. You don't know how lost I was after that night. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought, if I had Daniel, I'd have everything you once did. But I was wrong. I looked at her, coolly. Because Daniel betrayed you like he did me? She bit her lip, then nodded. He started pulling away after you left. Said things weren't exciting anymore. Said, maybe the baby wasn't even his. And then one day, he disappeared from my life like he'd never been there. I nodded, unfazed. That's called karma. It doesn't need me to serve it. It finds its way. She fell silent. Then, slowly, she reached into her purse and slid an envelope across the table. I know you don't need anything from me, but this, I want to return. The necklace you gave me when we were kids, and your college journal, the one I took and never gave back. I opened the envelope. The tiny silver star necklace, tarnished with time. I thought it had been lost forever. And the journal. The first page still held my handwriting. Don't forget your own dreams. My chest sank. Tessa's voice cracked. I always saw you as strong. And me? I was always the shadow. I just wanted someone to choose me. Not because of you. Not in comparison. I looked at her for a long time. For a second, I saw the little girl hiding behind the curtain, crying because she broke a doll, begging me to cover for her. That girl never really learned to stand on her own feet. But pity is not the foundation for forgiveness. I said quietly, You may have lived in my shadow, but I grew up in silence, where every mistake you made was forgiven. And every achievement of mine was treated like duty. Tessa bowed her head. I know, and I'm trying to make things right. I'm in therapy. I want to change. For myself, and for my child. I froze. Child? She nodded. I gave birth. A baby girl. Her name is Lily. Her voice softened. Her eyes lit up. The way only a mother's eyes can. I don't want her to grow up like me, chasing approval, feeling affection. I want her to know her worth, whether anyone sees it or not. Hearing that, something heavy sank inside me. Not quite forgiveness, but understanding began to seep through the layers of anger. Tessa's eyes were red. I don't expect you to forgive me. Just to know I'm trying. I gripped the handle of my bag. I even stood up. I looked at her again. Not with hate, but like you'd look at an old scar that still aches when it rains. I don't know if I can forgive you, but at least I don't hate you anymore. I'm just tired. Tessa stood too. He took a step forward, but I held up my hand. I need time and space. Maybe one day, I'll come meet Lily. Her lips quivered into a small, trembling smile. I'll be waiting. I left the cafe just as the rain began to fall. Tiny drops rolled down the car window like tears that didn't need sound. But this time, I didn't collapse. I didn't close myself off. I knew, even though the past can't be changed, some futures can still be rewritten. With truth, with courage, and by knowing exactly when to let go. One year after that fateful birthday night, I stood by the window of my new apartment, watching the first sunlight stream through the curtains and stretch across the wooden floor. Outside, the streets of Brooklyn were quiet, just a few car horns scattered through the calm of a Sunday morning. I held a cup of ginger tea in both hands, letting its warmth sink into my skin. And deeper still, into the parts of my heart that had once been torn. I had survived. Not survived a car crash or an illness, but something no one else could see. A marriage that was nothing but a polished shell, a sister who quietly devoured everything I held dear, and a family that smiled but never truly listened. I didn't break, but the cost wasn't small. After meeting with Tessa, I no longer felt tethered to anger or the need for revenge. I didn't rush to forgive her either. Instead, I let everything settle, like water after a storm. Long enough to see what was silt and what was mud. Tessa wrote to me a few months later. Not an email, a new text. A real handwritten letter. Her handwriting still the same soft curves I once taught her as a child. She wrote about her therapy journey, about sleepless nights with Lily crying endlessly, about the fear of being a mother with no one beside her. But there was one part that made me stop and sit in silence for a long time. I get it now, Olivia. I used to think you were the one who got the love, the recognition. But really, you were just better at enduring it all than I was. For the first time, I felt like my sister was seeing me. Not through envy, but through empathy. I didn't reply. But one afternoon in March, I went to visit Lily. She had brown eyes just like mine when I was little, and lips that curved like Tessa's. When I picked her up, she didn't cry. She just stared at me, as if asking, "Who are you?" I smiled, gently stroked her soft hair, and whispered, "To grown up, learning how to love herself again." My work changed too after everything. The From the Ashes blog grew beyond what I imagined, receiving thousands of messages from women all over, of all ages. Some divorced, some grieving, some just trying to escape a life that never felt like theirs. I was invited to speak at a nonprofit panel on emotional recovery. I stood on that stage not as an expert, but as someone who had once lived at the bottom. I told my story, no frills, no sugarcoating, just truth. When I finished, the whole room stood and applauded, not because they thought I was strong, but because they saw themselves in me. A publisher reached out, asked if I'd consider writing a book. I thought about it for a week, then said yes. The book was titled When I Chose Myself, and when it was finally published, I knew. I had carried myself farther out of the darkness than anyone else ever could. Lucas, the man I once met at that media seminar, was still by my side. We didn't rush into love, or into promises. Every step was careful, like people who had been hurt once and now knew how to walk slowly so they wouldn't fall again. Sometimes he cooked dinner. Sometimes I worked on the book while he lay on the couch reading an old novel. Few words, but enough warmth. One night, under the soft glow of city lights and a breeze on our balcony, he asked, "Do you ever regret it, Olivia? Leaving instead of forgiving?" I looked out at the skyline, then shook my head. Well, because leaving didn't mean I stopped loving. It meant I finally started loving myself more. My parents still kept some distance. My mother called a few times, shared stories about her health, the neighbors, how Lily could roll over now, how she smiled but never mentioned the past. I understood. Some generations don't know how to say sorry. They just show care in clumsy, quiet ways. My father sent a birthday card. Got the date right. No message, just a shaky handwritten line. "Thank you for being strong for all of us." I no longer held anger, only sadness, for all the silence we could have filled with love. If only we had listened to each other sooner. Tonight is my 37th birthday. No big party, just a few close friends, a small cake, a glass of red wine, and Lucas whispering by my ear, Happy birthday to the woman who chose herself. I looked around the dinner table. Not a single face that had once hurt me. But every face there belonged to someone I loved. And who loved me without condition. I realized, in the end, I hadn't lost everything like I once thought. I had only let go of what was never truly mine. If you've ever stood at the edge of heartbreak, if you've ever thought you couldn't move forward, trust me, you can. No one can rewrite your past. But you can choose the next chapter. Tell me, where are you listening from? Have you ever had to choose between holding on to someone or holding on to yourself? If this story speaks to you, leave a comment. And don't forget to follow the channel, because I still have more to share. Stories of people who rose from pain, who found light where there once was only darkness. Thank you for staying until the very end.